She hadn't spoken to him in 50 years. Not when he became governor, president, or when reporters asked her for dirt. Jane Wyman never spoke about Reagan until her death. Now we know why. Reagan's covert FBI work as Agent T-10 and their baby's terrible death make their divorce harsher than expected. Hollywood's perfect pair hid something so awful she vowed never to mention his name. Life began with sadness for Sarah Jane Mayfield. Her parents divorced in 1921 when she was 4, upsetting her middle-class childhood in St. Joseph, Missouri. 3 months later, her father died. Sarah Jane's mother left for Cleveland. She lost everything, not just her parents. Foster parents, Emma and Richard Folks, weren't very caring. Richard was a detective, and their home was cold and remote. Sarah Jane later admitted that the harsh discipline left her resentful for years. Living with 2 foster children, she occasionally called herself the youngest of 3, despite having no biological siblings. She used the parents' last name in school and on legal documents. When she was 13, she briefly resided in California with her foster mother before returning to Missouri. At home, something changed. Sarah Jane became something else. She sang on the radio as Jane Durrell. She modified her birth year to look older, to work while underage. People noticed her voice. She possessed something that set her apart despite her hardships. She quit high school at 15. She didn't only imagine Hollywood, she tried. Building a new life, not just a career, began with that leap. She was strong, determined, and ready for anything. She did slowly. Her efforts paid off in 1936. He signed her to Warner Brothers when Brian Foy spotted her potential. She was 19 and now Jane Wyman, after her first husband, Ernest Wyman. She married him aged 16 but claimed to be 19. The marriage failed, but the name and contract survived. She ultimately got into Warner Brothers, but it wasn't glamorous. Her fate was unknown to the studio. Her bits were tiny and hardly let her shine. It was frustrating, but she persisted. The studio system was hard for young ladies. You have to obey. No matter how minor the job, smile for the camera and work. Small roles and hard days characterized Jane's early Hollywood years. Her film debut was as a chorus girl in The Kid from Spain, 1932. But no one noticed she was there. She worked in films without credits for years. She kept dancing, smiling, and delivering her lines, waiting for attention. Warner Brothers hired her regularly, although primarily for B-movies. She was cast in cheap comedies and musicals that kept her in the spotlight. These films provided her experience, not stardom. She learned how to survive in the profession, perform in front of a camera, and be ready for her big break. Jane Wyman played forgettable roles in bad films before 1945. Hollywood didn't view her seriously. Everything changed when she was cast in Billy Wilder's The Lost Weekend. Interestingly, she wasn't first. She ranked 3rd. Katharine Hepburn and Jean Arthur declined. Wyman romped as Helen Street. James. At a period when few would discuss alcoholism, the film did. Edits made it burst, surprising audiences. Best Picture and 3 additional Oscars. Everyone was startled by Wyman's delicate and passionate performance. She was more than a gorgeous face. Finally, critics saw her dying. She went from forgotten B-movie actress to Hollywood star with that part. 1 year later, she demonstrated it wasn't a fluke. In The Yearling, Wyman changed totally. She played Ma Baxter, a worn-out frontier mother in Florida. Not the glamorous Jane Wyman they expected. She stripped everything down, understanding how 1870s women lived and worked. Warner Brothers executives initially doubted. They felt her appearance would offend audiences. Jack Warner trusted her after The Lost Weekend. The man was right. Wyman's Oscar nomination proved she could play major emotional parts. She lost that year, but it didn't matter. After she left the box, Hollywood tried to keep her in. Johnny Belinda in 1948 elevated Wyman's career. In a small fishing community, she plays deaf-mute Belinda McDonald, who is sexually assaulted and mothers. Hollywood had never told a heartbreaking story like this. Wyman planned for months. To live in silence, she attended a deaf school and waxed her ears while filming. Wyman had pushed for the movie years earlier after witnessing the stage version in 1940, making it even more dramatic. It took almost a decade, but she succeeded. Critics and spectators were astonished by her. She kept quiet during the film, yet talked more than other actresses. Pages of discussion. Her Oscar for Best Actress was the first in the sound era for a silent role. The picture received 12 nominations, the most that year. Wyman had succeeded. She accepted the Oscar in pure Jane Wyman flair. A smart 16-word statement got the crowd roaring without a lecture or monologue. I appreciate keeping my mouth shut once. Think I'll try again. Then she left. At first, Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman seemed like an ideal couple. They fell in love while filming Brother Rat in 1938 as young Hollywood stars. Reagan fell in love with Jane, a lovely blonde with a sharp wit and strong personality. He proposed with a 50-carat amethyst ring, her birthstone. Their story made front-page news by the time they married in January 1940 at a little Glendale chapel. Hollywood was hooked. The wedding images were everywhere. Warner Brothers marketed them as the industry's golden couple. The tale wasn't ideal behind the scenes. It followed them into their personal lives as well as their acting professions. Both were SAG members. Things changed there. Reagan rose fast, especially after World War II. In 1947, when the Union was in turmoil, he became SAG president. Jane was on the board too. Their joint labor gave them purpose, but also diverted them. Reagan focused on politics and union issues, while Jane continued acting. Everything changed when heartbreak struck. Christine, their infant daughter, died in June 1947. People say she was stillborn. Some say she lived barely a few hours. Neither could completely articulate or convey their pain. 3 months after Reagan became SAG president, their family was torn apart. Jane left him soon after. Her divorce was filed a year later. She mentioned mental brutality, but there was more. Nothing could repair their quiet after the loss. Other issues arose. When Jane Wyman played Belinda in Johnny Belinda, she transformed. She isolated herself to play a deaf-mute rape victim. She waxed her ears. Even at home, she stopped talking. Even to her husband, Ronald Reagan, she signed instead, then spoke for months as her role. They had recently lost their infant daughter, which no parent should ever experience. Instead of grieving together, Wyman and Reagan buried themselves in their roles. In union politics, the home stillness went beyond acting. Reality set in. When the movie opened and Wyman won an Oscar, their marriage was finished. It was said that Reagan's rising involvement in the Screen Actors Guild drove them apart due to politics. Nice excuse, and the studio appreciated neat stories, but it wasn't true. Reagan dragged Wyman to meetings and ignored her opinions, she recalled. It was true. She rarely mentioned her cruelty claim in court, Reagan's acting career stalling while hers was booming, or her growing closeness to Lou Ayres, her Johnny Belinda co-star. Reagan bitterly joked about blaming Johnny Belinda for the divorce. The agony of losing their baby lingered. Years later, Wyman said, "I don't know anything about politics." She understood political blame was simpler for everyone. Reagan lived a double life behind the scenes. In public, he preached unity and fairness, while quietly providing the FBI names. He and Wyman named Communist Party-aligned actors under the code Name T10. The findings were concealed for decades, but Reagan was already in touch with the Bureau in 1947 when he denied knowing communists. Wyman grew bored. Reagan fussed over secret reports and red scares, but she worked. Another truth they never shared strained their relationship. Living under FBI and public monitoring exacerbated their downfall. After their 1949 divorce, Jane Wyman had full custody of their children. But legal custody and present parenting were distinct. She had little time to raise her daughter Maureen, and adopted son Michael because her business was blossoming. Reagan, preoccupied, only saw them on Sundays, taking them to church. They were mostly raised by nannies and housekeepers. At 25, Michael stated he really got to know his parents, and one instant spoke it everything. Reagan asked his son, "My name is Ronald Reagan," after giving a graduation address at Michael's school. "What's your?" That line haunted Michael forever. Both youngsters felt invisible despite their famous parents. Jane Wyman had one rule when the divorce became public. Be quiet about Ronald. Not for press, not for fans. She kept quiet even decades later when Reagan became president and the public wanted to hear from his first wife. Reporters who mentioned Reagan were silenced. She claimed to have made 86 films and 350 TV episodes. "This is my 54th year in business." She only wanted to be known for that, not as Reagan's ex-wife or a political footnote. In the 1950s, Jane Wyman and Douglas Sirk created magic on screen. In addition to acting, she redefined Hollywood melodramas. Her first film was Magnificent Obsession, which she promoted after reading the book. Her and Sirk's careers needed a spark, and this film succeeded. The film was a hit, but more importantly, it started a unique creative partnership.